Today's show is sponsored by Datadog. With infrastructure monitoring, distributed tracing, and logs, Datadog provides end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. Datadog's distributed tracing and APM generates detailed flame graphs for real requests, enabling you to visualize how requests propagate through your distributed infrastructure. See which services or calls are generating errors or contributing to overall latency, and dive deeper into your production code with an always-on code profiler to pinpoint the root cause. Start monitoring your applications with a free trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/APM-Cloudcast. That's datadog.com/APM-Cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. As we record this, it is the middle of October, and KubeCon is happening this week, an actual in-person event as well. And rather than try to cover all of that in the breaking news there, we're going to do a recap of KubeCon announcements next week. So heads up for that. But we do have some other news stories this week. We're going to jump right in. First of all, there is, from the good folks over at VMware, a state of software supply chain document, specifically around open source for 2021. If you're interested in that, go take a look. I went and downloaded it, and it is by the Tanzu team, and goes into a bit, lots of stats around open source software and common challenges, and it could be maybe procedural challenges, could be security challenges, but it's a very, very good read. Lots of good data to dig into. And of course, the takeaway there, of course, is they have an offering for you as well. So heads up, it is a pretty good document and a nice little ebook if that is of interest to you. For our second story this week, we actually have something that's a bit of a hobby project and a bit of a hacking around project a little bit, and that is bringing Linux to the Apple M1 based Macs. Now, if you're not familiar with the technology behind them, of course, Apple, as they tend to do over time, they tend to tighten up the supply chains, make everything pretty proprietary over time. And even taking something like an Apple laptop, we used to be able to say, in the Intel ones, you could run Boot Camp on them and run Windows, or you could run Linux on them very easily. Well, when they went to the M1 chips, their custom chip, and then they also put some TPM and some other very proprietary things on there to where even getting Linux to run on it was a bit of a challenge. Some folks have really taken on that challenge, though, and are making good progress. There is a kernel running on it, and a lot of the basic drivers are there. The GPU specifically is not, but as they state, even without the GPU, it still runs pretty fast. Now, there isn't an installer released just yet. They want to get the kernel a little more stable before they do an installer. And it also makes me wonder, kind of thinking out loud for just a second, though, if this isn't a little bit like, jailbreaking iPhones back in the day, where it's going to be a bit of a cat and mouse game where the second they release an installer, well, guess what? Apple's going to change something or patch something or do something else to invalidate the build. So time will tell just how far and how successful they're able to take this project. But I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about briefly this week. And last bit of news, there's some new companies that have gotten announced and really, really smart people that have gone over there. And we'll put the links to the show notes in there. So ChainGuard, secure software supply chain Acuity, GitOps related, and Cosmonic, which is WebAssembly and Wasm Cloud, also launched. Now, if you're not familiar with WebAssembly and Wasm Cloud and you're kind of scratching your head, why did I mention them? Well, guess what? They are going to be a guest coming up here in the near future as well. So we're going to be digging into that technology very, very shortly. And with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. And right after the break, we're going to be talking to Jonathan Seelig, CEO of Ridge, about distributed cloud architectures.
Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And, folks, if you listen to the show on a regular basis, you know that, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've sort of skewed maybe a little more towards the three big cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and Google, as a lot of the market is moved in that direction. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to get away from their data centers, get away from managing what they do. But the reality in a lot of cases is that while they continue to spin up new regions, new locations, for larger organizations especially, or specialty types of use cases, or all sorts of things actually these days, where exactly AWS or Azure or Google decide to put a data center may not be the most optimal thing for your business. It may not be the most optimal thing for your application. There may be a lot of reasons why you need something somewhere else or in a different consumption model. And we're always, if you followed the show for a long time, we're always interested in kind of what's next, but also new ways of thinking about these problems. And today we get a chance to really kind of dive into something that we think is pretty interesting, and we also get a chance to dive into it with somebody who has really been there doing interesting stuff and new creative ideas for a long, long time. So excited to kind of dive a little bit into a more distributed cloud architecture. Excited to have Jonathan Seelig, co-founder and CEO of Ridge. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to dive into some new stuff. This is going to be one of these shows where we educate folks a little bit, which I know a lot of folks come to the show looking for. Before we dive into Ridge, give us a little bit of your background, because you've built some pretty amazing stuff in the past, and that knowledge, I think, is going to be helpful going forward.
Well, thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be on the podcast. My background, I have spent the last 25 plus years, I'm not going to admit exactly how much time it's actually been, working in the infrastructure space, from telecom equipment all the way through to internet. I was one of the co-founders of Akamai Technologies 24 years ago at this point, and we started the business in 1997 when we were at MIT. And at Akamai, we built the world's first content distribution network and kind of pioneered that category in the industry. And the idea of distributed infrastructure and of giving content owners back at that time a very global in scale and reach infrastructure off of which to deliver content was really a novel concept. At the time, if you were a content owner, the way that you would try to get yourself greater geographic distribution, greater performance, greater scalability is that you would buy more servers and stick them in the basement of your building and call up the phone company and get more connectivity. We came along and we said, we think there's a better solution. We think that you could put your content in tens, hundreds, or even thousands of places around the world. And the way to do that is through a service provider like us at Akamai. So the idea of distributed infrastructure is one that has been near and dear to me for a very long time. And at Ridge, we are working on a very globally diverse, highly distributed capability for cloud computing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you and I spoke before we started recording. You not only, built Akamai, you essentially created this entire category of CDN. You had a chance to be an investor. You were, kind of on the side of hearing interesting ideas and seeing how the world was evolved. What sort of triggered this idea in your head to sort of get back into building product, building technology that said, hey, people may want to do cloud computing a different way? Like, what was the light bulb, or what are you seeing that's making, kind of the behind the thesis of we need a newer way of delivering capabilities?
Yeah. So I did spend over a decade as an investor and board member and advisor, much of that at a venture capital firm as a partner. And I did have a good chunk of my career out of the kind of operating world and on the investment side. What got me back into the the company building side of things again, which is what I'm currently doing, day in, day out at Ridge, was really a couple of things. For me personally, I was excited about being back with a team and having the opportunity to once again take a single product or a single kind of a concept, an idea, and try to make it a reality and try to build a scalable, successful, revenue generating, eventually profitable business on that idea. So that to me was from a personal level what I got excited about. And then at a market opportunity and why is the market timing right for Ridge? Why does the world need a cloud that gives the application owner a tremendous level of control and granularity and options of where they can, in fact, deploy their application? Well, there were really a couple of big things that we saw happening, my co-founders and I, when we decided that we thought Ridge was that the opportunity for Ridge was right and that the timing was right for what we're building at Ridge. And those are as follows. First of all, we were seeing more and more applications start to get built that are by definition latency sensitive and need proximity to an end user in order to do a good job. Yep. There's a lot of stuff that you can do without needing to worry too much about latency and proximity to the compute, but you can't do things like any sort of autonomous control of a vehicle, a drone. You can't collect huge amounts of data without being able to do some pre-processing at the edge of the network before it comes back into the core. And so we were starting to see more and more applications that, in fact, kind of by definition needed something that is more diverse and geographically distributed. And then the second thing that we were seeing a really big uptick in regulations in lots of different places around the world. A lot of different countries, a lot of different industries that started to get quite adamant that compute and application processing that is sensitive in nature happen, within some particular geography or within some particular security enclosure. And so all of a sudden, there became a real interest in having these cloud computing capabilities, not necessarily just in the core geographies that the hyperscale public clouds and that infrastructure service providers on the whole had traditionally kind of focused on, the East Coast, West Coast, London, Frankfurt, Tokyo kind of model all of a sudden wasn't enough.
Right. And I think what's interesting, even back when you were starting Akamai, but obviously fast forward to today, as a company, especially if you're thinking about delivering a cloud capability, you kind of have a couple of options, but one of those options that probably doesn't ever come into play anymore is this idea of I'm going to build the infrastructure, right? There is a ton of infrastructure that's available to companies, whether it's through the cloud providers, but Equinix and literally thousands of other colos and things that are out there. You're delivering an ability to say, hey, look, let me take advantage of all of that, or let your customers take advantage of all that, and you're distributing really sort of intelligence, software manageability on top of that. Kind of walk us through, the foundations of what's in the Ridge architecture? What are the primitive things that make up how you deliver the service?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there certainly has been a very big shift over the last 20 years, right, in how people think about ownership of the underlying infrastructure assets that power the applications that people are writing. 20 years ago, if you were an application developer, you thought about what server platform you were going to be on, and that's not something you really think about today anymore. You just assume that you're going to be in in a cloud. So there are very kind of big differences there. What we've been able to do at Ridge is we have been able to partner with these tremendous infrastructure service providers and managed service providers who are located all over the world. In every country around the world, there is a fantastic service provider that has superlative space, power, connectivity, very often has some form of compute offering for their customers. Sometimes they call it a virtual data center, a VDC. Sometimes they call it a private cloud. And those service providers in those geographies, as awesome as they are, and many of them also serve as kind of on-ramps to the hyperscale clouds in those geographies. Those service providers, as tremendous as they are, tend not to have the modern capabilities that the modern cloud native application developer and application owner is looking for. They don't have managed Kubernetes. They don't have managed object storage. Those sorts of managed services simply aren't available from those service providers. And what that means is that there are a lot of different markets around the world, a lot of different geographies around the world, where your choice is either figure out how to manage it yourself or make all of the users in that particular place traipse back to wherever the hyperscalers have a data center, Singapore, Tokyo, Frankfurt. But how do you do things like facial recognition, like license plate reading for parking lots, things that you should be able to sort of trivially deploy if you have a server in country? Well, now all of a sudden the round trip times, the latency, make those things, quite unusable. And you sort of wake up one day and you say, what do you mean I can't actually run a license plate recognition as a cloud-based service on a managed Kubernetes offering in Israel or in Turkey? That seems crazy. Well, right. Round trip that to a hyperscale data center in Frankfurt, and it simply doesn't work well.
Right. Yeah. You get into sort of the basics of we've created the concept of this application that we think provides a level of value, business value as a service. And then you start doing the math of saying, yeah, but if I apply old ways of, location or, number of people that have to manage that or setting up equipment, like, okay, all the economics go out the window, right? So you really have to sort of begin from the premise of, I have to do this in a new way. And maybe there's a limitation or whatever, but like you said, I have to do the computing locally, but I have to operate it as if it's, this global service and becomes sort of an interesting mix of kind of overlap of new technology and the new business that you have to sort of a new business model.
Well, yes. And the reason that that the development community and that the application owner is choosing to develop those applications in a framework that allows for portability, that allows for ease of deployment, that allows for deployment on a managed service as opposed to needing to own and operate your own servers. The reason that people are using Kubernetes and those types of platforms is to give themselves this flexibility. And so to walk into a geography and all of a sudden say, but hold on, what do you mean I have to run my own Kubernetes infrastructure here and I can't buy a managed infrastructure from anyone? The whole reason one of the big reasons I went in this direction architecturally was to give myself that flexibility. And so what we've been able to do at Ridge is to build partnerships with data centers and service providers in, at this point, 100 different places around the world that create a distributed platform on which we can run managed services types of application, delivery for the application owner.
Yeah, no, and I as folks know, my day job overlaps Kubernetes quite a bit, so I pay attention to that market. It is really interesting, as much as there are, really well-known sort of, I'll call them, cloud managed services from the cloud providers. The ability to do it outside of sort of their regions, or especially as you get into these a little more dispersed places, there really is very little in the market. So I mean, there's a huge opportunity just in the managing of Kubernetes space alone that's been unfilled, even though we're seeing Kubernetes take off as a deployment model and a consumption model all over the world, which is so there's a big opportunity there, and I think as you said, people start to spread out their applications from being purely centralized, that opportunity really takes off.
Well, and I definitely agree with that, and I think that one of the things that we are seeing is that it's not just about the geographies. It's sometimes also about the application owner having their own infrastructure that they already own and operate and have deployed somewhere, and they want to move into this hybrid deployment model of having stuff on-prem. Before we started recording, you and I chatted about that a little bit, right? That a lot of large companies are saying, well, okay, great, I'm going to migrate some of this stuff into a managed service offering in the cloud, but I also have a lot of stuff that's going to keep running in my own data center or in a data center that I've leased from an Equinix or an INAP or a Lumen. And so all of that needs to be able to support these managed services that are the bread and butter of the modern application architecture.
Yeah, no, and we see that as well. I mean, the more you talk about it, the more you realize there are. We talked about location, we talked about regulations, we talked about, in some cases, underserved markets. But, there's this other thing, which is we're seeing more and more, even in large or mid-sized organizations, where the central IT group that used to do all the buying decisions, make all the sort of architecture decisions, is kind of getting either decentralized or fragmented. And those groups that fragment off from that, want what they could get out of the cloud, but sometimes they have, like you said, restrictions. They have to live within their own data centers. They have their own latency requirements. So yeah, it does, as you start to break down the number of use cases, it grows and grows in terms of, where the needs are going to be and where they continue to be.
Yeah, agreed.
As one of the challenges of podcasting, it's an audio medium. We'd probably love to have a whiteboard to walk through a lot of these things. Yeah. Give us, some of the what are sort of some of the core primitives that, if somebody comes along to you and says, hey, we meet a lot of these criteria that you guys have been talking about, where you could help us in managing stuff. What do they see? What do they interact with? What do you abstract? Kind of walk me through the engagement model that people have with the Ridge system.
Yeah. So we view the core offerings that many different application owners are going to be interested in and look for as being managed Kubernetes is absolutely one of the kind of flagship things that people are looking for. And managed object storage is another one that people are looking for, and managed containers probably is sort of a third as well. And so if you think about kind of the core capabilities that we have developed at Ridge, we have built a managed Kubernetes service. It's called RKS, the Ridge Kubernetes service. We've built a service called ROS, the Ridge Object Storage capability. And those services are designed to look just the way that you would expect them to if you know how these services look from the best of breed providers. The object storage capability is fully S3 compatible. The Kubernetes service, if you have ever run on Google's GKE, what we have built will look very, very familiar to you and is fully compliant with all of the CNCF standards, is a fully CNCF certified managed Kubernetes offering. And what that means is that we are giving you something that looks familiar. The APIs look just the way you would expect them to look and the way that you're familiar with. The big difference when you engage with the Ridge platform is that you have the opportunity to select from literally hundreds of places where you could in fact run this capability. And so if you have an application that has a customer requirement that it run effectively and with low latency and with proximity or with data sovereignty concerns in mind in a particular place, the Ridge solution will allow you to run that application in a way that is completely familiar to you in a geography and at a data center that nobody else probably can offer you.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, and this is something that we'll put some things in the show notes for folks that are listening and go, yeah, I want to dig into this some more, because there are some very good links and obviously more visual things that we can share with folks. I'm curious,
people can get to see me waving my hands at showing how distributed we are.
That's right. How much, obviously, you've done this before in terms of distributed systems. How much, if somebody looks at this, or maybe it's behind the scenes since it's a managed service, like how much does your experience from having built and run and learned from Akamai and CDNs, are you able to bring into this new environment with Ridge? Is it similar teams and engineers or similar concepts, or is the world really kind of advanced to where you're having to take on new techniques?
Oh, it's a great question. The world is very different from when we started Akamai, and so it. I like to say that there's a lot of stuff that we're doing at Ridge that sort of rhymes with things that we did before at Akamai, that I did before at Akamai, but they really aren't kind of directly similar, I guess I would say, in certain ways. When you're talking about content, you have the ability and the opportunity to replicate content quite broadly, put it in many, many places, and be quite dynamic in how you scale up and down the locations in which you're going to have that content live. The application world, obviously, is a little bit different. The application world is much more specific to each and every application, and you don't have quite that same level of dynamicism in terms of your ability to move stuff around. You have to kind of make good choices about where you're going to have stuff reside, and then kind of scale up or down gradually based on demand. So it really is a little bit of a different proposition. What is at its core very similar is that at Akamai, we were able to, because we didn't have to build our own data centers, we didn't have to put our own buildings up, we didn't have to deal with our own kind of space, power, cooling, connectivity, but rather we got to partner with data centers in lots and lots of places around the world. Now, we were buying and deploying our own servers,
sure,
but we didn't have to build the data centers. In a very similar way at Ridge, we, by partnering with managed service providers and hosting companies and infrastructure service providers in lots of different places around the world, have access to a lot of existing compute capacity that is out there in the world. There are a lot of service providers who have an offering that is a virtualized compute offering for customers, but they don't have managed object storage. They don't have managed Kubernetes. They don't have a modern way of presenting that to the customer. And so I'd say there are similarities to some of how we built Akamai on the supply side of Ridge's business in having service providers we can partner with in order to scale. On the demand side, dealing with companies who have full-fledged applications they're trying to run in lots of different places is a little bit different than the content world that we dealt with at Akamai. So I guess I would say it rhymes, but it doesn't. But it certainly doesn't match right up.
Right, exactly. It's the old saying. I think it's something like history doesn't repeat itself, but it does seem to rhyme.
It does rhyme, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to ask sort of one last question before we wrap up, because you're busy running a growing company. As you're engaging with users, what are some of the things that people find sort of immediate value, maybe even just beyond, hey, it's managed for me, in having this flexibility of where things are deployed, consistency of deployment, consistency of the technology and APIs?
Well, so I think that you've said it right there. Having a consistency of how things can be deployed, having a consistency of APIs and of underlying technologies, knowing that a fully CNCF compliant architecture is kind of there for you to leverage to get yourself very broadly distributed, I think lends a lot of comfort to application owners, because the promise of the cloud and the ability to write an application which then is going to be portable and you're going to be able to run it in a lot of different places as you need really only comes to fruition with something like Kubernetes, or with something that is so standardized like the S3 protocols and interfaces. I think that in the first decade and a half of the shift to cloud, there have been a lot of architectures that created some vendor locking that often I think was a little bit surprising to customers. I think a lot of application owners kind of woke up and were like, oh, hold on a second. I didn't realize that if I used this particular service, it meant I could only kind of run stuff on AWS or on GCP or wherever, right? And the work that you're doing, at Red Hat, the work that we're doing as part of the CNCF Foundation and the commitment to Kubernetes as a really important building block of this, is really around portability, flexibility, and keeping people from being vendor locked. That's a critical part of the growth of this next generation of applications, in our opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree, and the fact that I happen to do it in my day job as well, I think kind of reinforces that. So
yeah, exactly.
Jonathan,
you gave it the office.
Yeah, exactly. I think we could probably dig into this for quite a bit longer, but I want to be conscious of time. I'm going to wrap it up there. I want to thank you so much for introducing us to, again, this space in the marketplace that has a need for solutions. There's obviously quite a few new applications that are getting built, and more obviously as COVID has sort of changed a lot of what we do out there. Real quick, if folks want to engage with you, engage with the Ridge team, what are some good ways to go about doing that?
Well, we are going to be at KubeCon in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks' time. I guess I shouldn't say a relative date, given that I don't know exactly when you're going to put this podcast.
They'll be at KubeCon. We know what that is. Yep.
We will be at KubeCon in Los Angeles. We invite people to come and visit us. Our website is ridge.co, ridge.co. I'm Jonathan at ridge.co. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Happy to talk to anybody who wants to engage in this discussion. We believe that for Ridge to be successful, there's a whole ecosystem play that will unfold here. I know that you guys at IBM Red Hat feel very similarly about this from the Kubernetes kind of community standpoint. And so we are, of course, eager to engage with folks who see this vision and understand or want to understand how we think about this, and to collaborate.
Yeah, good stuff. Folks, again, we want to thank Jonathan for his time today, kind of giving us some insight, and we're going to wrap it up with that. As always, thank you all for listening. Thank you for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community and giving us feedback in all the ways that you listen to the podcast each week. So with that, we're going to wrap up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.